I've got a friend I don't see often. His name is Scott. One reason we don't hang much anymore is because Scott moved from LA to Portland a few years ago. The other reason is that Scott is a lot. I say that with love. See, he's a self-proclaimed climate radical, passionate about healing the planet and whatnot. Look, I care about all that too. I'm just not much of a zealot. Still, I get a kick out of Scott. He's feisty, and I like that he puts himself on the line for stuff he cares about. So about once a year, or maybe every two, I go to see him in Portland, where we drink craft beers and talk about saving the world. That's where I was last weekend. I just landed. Scott picked me up from the airport, told me we were going on an adventure. When I asked where, he got all cloak and dagger, said I'd have to wait and see. I wasn't worried. This was Scott's M.O. He was all about the theatrics. Before I knew it, he drove out of the city into the bowels of Oregon's dense forest. An hour later, he turned onto a dirt road, and I saw a group of people gathered around a logging site, signs waving around in the air. Some were on megaphones, crying foul on deforestation. He'd taken me to a climate protest. Scott got in the mix right away, but I stood off to the side, watching the group. At some point, I noticed a man standing beside me. He was a little squirrely, kept glancing at the surrounding trees. When he caught me looking, he nodded to the protest, said it was a good thing, what they were doing. A really good thing. Because this land was a habitat, which meant clearing it away was bound to displace the animals who lived here. Some would move on to greener pastures, some would die, and some would fight back. He wasn't talking about a bird flying in your face or a bear taking a swipe at you. No, it was more perilous than that. See, he had it on good authority that there was a beast who lived in these woods. It was a lurker, a prowler, a deadly creature that stuck to the shadows, blended in with the dirt. It was part of the forest, so it knew exactly where to hide. That's why few have ever seen it. Till recently, that is. Because not long ago, this thing made its presence known with a roar of fire, brimstone, and blood. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 53, The Hidebehind. The guy told me he was actually in the logging industry himself. Used to be a transpo driver for another site, a mile or two away from here. He didn't do that anymore, though. 'Cause, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. The transpo driver told me a story about a man named Larry. All this began about a month ago, when Larry was driving into the misty, impenetrable woods north of Portland, the same forest that we were standing in. Larry stared out of the windshield as he drove, taking in the dense wall of Douglas firs that lined the road, a swirl of mist around their tops. It was late morning, but the light was dim, dreary. Made Larry feel like evening was in full swing rather than a few hours away. He exhaled slowly, breathing out his annoyance. He wished it was the end of the day, because he was eager for his little errand to be over already. Larry was in charge of a logging site in these woods, but in his case, being in charge didn't mean boots on the ground. Larry was what was called a regional logging manager, or director, one of those fancy corporate titles. Basically, Larry sat in an office in Portland all day and gave orders, while the loggers and their supervisors did all the legwork of ripping down trees and whatnot. He liked it that way. He felt powerful, hiding behind his desk in the city, sending orders and memos via email. Grandma would have called him a coward. She had a thing about people who made decisions from afar. As she'd say, they never got to see the repercussions of their actions. That kind of distance can make you cruel and stupid. Anyway, today Larry had to leave his comfy office because for some reason, his logging site wasn't taking his calls or answering his emails. It'd been exactly 3 days. Larry's boss finally demanded he go out and do a site check. So, there he was, driving into the deep woods north of Portland, without his good old desk to hide behind. It made him feel vulnerable, like he'd lost his superpower. Out his window, he noticed a sign for some campgrounds. That sign meant he was almost there. About a half-mile later, he turned onto a logging road that led to the site. As soon as he did, he could tell something was wrong. The road led to a cut in the dense green trees. A fog had rolled in, settling over the area like a blanket, encircling tons of neatly stacked trunks. There were a few trailers on one end. Cranes sat around the area. There were other heavy duties as well. A transport truck, a digger. It was a loud, bustling mechanical scene. At least, it usually was. That's what was weird. It was quiet. No machines buzzing. No workers. No movement. Larry stopped the car. There was an oppressive silence to the area, like the thick forest around the site had made some kind of soundproof wall. The ethereal fog gently floated around his car, kissing the windows like a welcome brigade of ghosts. Larry got out of the car and headed to the trailer, eyes peeled for signs of his crew. His boots sank into something dense and soft, almost like a thick balloon full of sludge. He looked down, just as the foggy blanket that covered the ground dispersed. It took him a while to realize what he was looking at. That's what happened to me before, when your eyes see something but for whatever reason the brain can't process it, so you just stare. That's what Larry did, until a few seconds passed and he realized he was looking at a dead man. It wasn't just any dead guy. This corpse was really, really dirty, like the muck from the ground had just been scraped up and smeared all over his skin. His mouth hung open in what might have once been a scream, but now was held ajar by a bunch of forest floor debris that had been crammed into it. A bouquet of sticks, mud, and moss poured out of his lips. Larry could see twigs and leaves bursting from behind the man's eyes, too, like his head was stuffed. Larry was shocked, numb, actually, like any kind of ability to feel had been sucked right out of him. But seconds later, a vicious electric tear tore through his body all at once. His throat went raw as a voracious scream poured out of it. Larry staggered away, instinctively trying to put some distance between him and the gruesome corpse. But he didn't get far before he stepped on another one. Yeah, a second body, just a few feet away from the first guy. He was also dead, dirty, and stuffed to the gills with forest trash. Larry looked around the area and suddenly saw them. All of them. Yeah, there were dozens of bodies, lying beneath the sinister fog. The mud on their skin and leaves in their mouths had created a kind of camouflage. They sort of blended in with the ground and the piles of logs around them. But now, there was no mistaking it. It was a massacre. These were the loggers of this site, killed and maimed by some... Larry shuddered. He had no idea what did this. His mouth was paper dry. He felt the contents of his stomach rush up his throat. He bent over to spew out his breakfast. Once he did that, he sort of felt better, at least good enough to think more clearly. He knew he had to call the police, obviously. He grabbed his cell from his pocket, but there was no service. The site usually had Wi-Fi, but it must be down, because his phone wouldn't connect. He knew there was an old-school radio in the logging office. So Larry hurried to the trailer, careful not to step on any of the loggers that lay in his path. But before he could get there, something moved in the trees behind the trailer. It happened fast, so Larry couldn't see what it was. As he stared into the woods, he noticed how the fog curled in the smoky tendrils around the skirts of the firs. The dark, deep shadows of the forest seemed to thicken. It was sort of mesmerizing. Larry realized he'd never thought about the woods as alive before. Obviously they were, but to him, trees had always been more of a material. A wall of a house, paper, someone's deck. You get the idea. Except now, standing here, watching the shifting fog and the deepening shadows, he realized the forest was a beast in its own right, one that could swallow him whole if it wanted to. Something moved among the trees again. This time he saw it, or he thought he did. It was gone so fast, Larry wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. He really hoped he had, because he thought he'd just seen a fur-covered hand disappear behind a tree trunk. Its long, ragged nails had been dripping with thick, vibrantly red blood. Larry stared at the tree, the one where the hand had disappeared. Nothing else happened. The tree itself was willowy, slender. It was impossible that any kind of creature could hide behind it without him seeing. So Larry told himself he'd imagined it and focused on his mission. Trailer, phone, help. Larry hurried to the office door, stepping over body after body. He tried not to look down. He didn't want to see their dead, dirty, blood-filled eyes staring up at him, like deranged, discarded wax figurines. Finally, he swung open the trailer door and threw himself inside. Things were bad in there, too. The site supervisor lay slumped over her desk. Rabid claw marks had raked through her skin, to the point where Larry could see her spine, poking out from violent, ragged gashes. A few more bodies lay strewn about the trailer, all bloody and ravaged, all full of leaves and moss and other kinds of foliage. The air was thick and rancid. The scene outside had the benefit of aeration. These bodies had just been baking in this metal box since the day they stopped returning Larry's calls. Larry moved over to the desk, trying to breathe through his mouth so he didn't pick up the smell. The supervisor's hand was stretched out. Her long, dirty fingers lay draped on top of the radio. Larry winced as he gently pushed it to the side. Her skin was cold and clammy. Another bout of nausea roared up his throat. This time, he pushed it down. Larry grabbed the radio and flipped its switch. It was completely dead. That's when he noticed it was also sort of wet. He looked at the desk. The supervisor's coffee cup was lying on its side. Its contents had formed a puddle, which pooled around the radio. Larry closed his eyes. Panic. All he felt was pure panic. He tried to take a breath. It was going to be okay, he told himself. He just had to get in his car and drive back to civilization. Or at least drive until he got service again. He could do this. His little pep talk gave him enough guts to run out of the trailer and sprint to his car. When he got there, he fell inside, slammed the door, and exhaled. But when he turned the ignition, the car wouldn't start. Larry's eyes drifted to the windshield where he could see the hood. It was gone, like ripped clean off. He'd been in such a hurry to get inside the car he hadn't noticed it. The engine and all the parts were exposed, and they were messed up, ripped and sparking, like someone had battered it with a rock. Dread crept through his body like a deep chill, 'cause yeah, he was totally screwed. But also, he understood something that he wished dearly wasn't true. That whatever killed all those loggers was still here, and it didn't want Larry to leave. I love the holidays, but with how busy they are, I'm always looking for ways to stress less. HelloFresh helps make mealtime manageable, saving you from searching for recipes or all that grocery shopping. Just pick your meals, and everything you need is delivered right to your door. Every HelloFresh recipe includes high-quality, sustainably sourced ingredients, like produce that comes fresh from the farm. I have an incredibly busy schedule, but HelloFresh makes my life manageable. I mean, if I had to manage Thanksgiving, the rest of the holidays, work, and everything else I do, and kids, man, I'd go nuts. But HelloFresh makes my life damn fun. Get 10 free meals at HelloFresh.com/freefool. Applied across 7 boxes, new subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals. Just go to HelloFresh.com/freefool. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Hi there. I want to tell you about a podcast I think you'll like. It's called These Woods Are Haunted from Travel Channel. On These Woods Are Haunted, hear true stories from people whose wilderness adventures were cut short by terrifying and unexplained phenomena. On one episode in the woods of Montana, a man feels like he's being watched as his surroundings fall quiet. Then, off to the side, he sees a creature with a hollowed-out deer skull over its face. In another episode, a mother-daughter hike takes a dark turn as the two women are chased down a mountain by a sinister creature. Behind every snap of a twig, rustle of leaves, could be a creature lying in wait, stalking your every move. So if you guys listen to Run Fool and you love our scary stories, and remember, you run when you're supposed to, I think you will love These Woods Are Haunted from Travel Channel. When you're in the woods, you're never truly alone. Listen to These Woods Are Haunted wherever you get your podcasts. Larry's eyes raked the damp, murky woods around him, searching for his attacker. He didn't know what he was looking for. A person, an animal, something in between. He remembered that blood-soaked fur hand, the one he thought he'd imagined. Larry took a breath, then another. He knew if he stayed there in that car, he was sitting prey. Whatever vicious thing was out there would eventually get him too. He had to do something. So, before he could talk himself out of it, he moved. He flung open the door and took off. He sprinted down the logging road. He was headed towards the desolate highway, because maybe a car would pass by, and he remembered seeing those campgrounds on his way in. If he could find people or a working vehicle, maybe he could get out of there. The cool air rushed into his lungs as he ran. He flew past trees and leapt over puddles in the uneven road. As he went, he noticed something. It was like a blur on the periphery of his vision, but every time he glanced towards it, he couldn't see anything. Just the dense wall of trees at the roadside. When he looked back ahead, it would reappear, a little smudge of movement at the corner of his eye. It was driving him crazy, like an unscratchable itch. It made his heart race, his teeth clench. He wanted to get off this road. Up ahead, the sign for the campgrounds rose out of fog. It was the one he passed on his way in. The wood placard was surrounded by deep greenery, like the forest was trying to pull it away from the road. Larry hurtled past the sign into a small, heavily wooded parking lot, more of a dirt patch than any official space. The forest crowded around it, forming a vibrant canopy above. Dew from the branches' wet leaves dripped down steadily. The lot sat on the edge of a narrow trail with a wooden guardrail at its side, and in front of that guardrail was a car. Larry pretty much melted with relief. Someone was here. It seemed like the vehicle had just arrived. It was still running. The car was one of those massive SUVs. It was old, too, so it let out a burp of exhaust as the driver shut off the engine. Then a man and woman got out. Now, these people were what I'd call faux campers. Maybe you're one of them. I'm not being judgmental. I'm one, too. It's the kind of person who maybe once a year takes some lawn chairs and s'mores into the woods, hangs out for half a day just because they feel like it's something they should do. But they're not exactly nature people. I say this because this couple wasn't exactly respectful of the majestic woods they found themselves in. When they opened their doors, a bunch of road trip trash spilled out. I'm talking soda bottles, candy wrappers, the works. They did a half-assed job of picking it up before wandering around to the back of the car to unload their camping gear. They didn't notice Larry. When he cleared his throat, they turned to stare at him, confused, waiting for him to explain why he was there and what he wanted. He started to tell them that they should all leave, now, because there was something out there, something bad. And Larry barely saw what happened next. That's how fast it was. A mass of fur and teeth shot out from behind a tree, grabbed the woman, and disappeared behind another trunk. Larry and the man just gaped. Then, the screams began. I sweat a lot at night, but you know what makes me feel better? Miracle Made's bed sheets. They keep me cool, they keep me comfortable, and you know what? They're inspired by NASA and use silver-infused fabrics that are temperature regulating so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. This is the closest I'll ever get to space is these sheets. So go get yourself some Miracle Made sheets so you can be cool at night too, and you can feel like me. Go to trymiracle.com/run to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo RUN at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/run and use the code RUN to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/run to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. You know, I live a pretty lonely life. If it wasn't for June's Journey, I don't know what I would do. My kids are gone. They're out in the streets doing whatever they do. They've forgotten all about their father, and they leave me alone. I used to have a dog. I don't anymore. But you know what I do have? June's Journey. And June's Journey occupies my mind in such a way that my kids can stay gone. The dog, too, because I got June's Journey. And that makes me happy. It will make you happy, too. Step into the shoes of a bold young woman uncovering scandalous family secrets at her sister's estate. Unleash your creativity by designing your luxurious island estate, complete with sprawling gardens and stunning architecture. Escape reality and immerse yourself in a gripping tale of mystery, murder, and romance where every clue brings you closer to the truth. Enjoy seasonal content with changing challenges, stunning landscapes, and exclusive rewards year-round. Discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android. The woman's wails were violent, messy, gurgling. It was a wretched thing to hear, and it only got worse. When, seconds later, another sound joined in, a moaning from some kind of creature. It was loud and anguished, but also sort of musical, like it was harmonizing with the gory, gut-punching sounds of a human body being torn apart. This ballad of carnage rose in volume until both of them cut out sharply. Then, Larry heard something scraping against dirt. A squishing sound came right after. He understood what was happening. It was the same thing that happened to the loggers. The woman was being stuffed with mud, leaves, whatever this terrifying monster could find. A final, resounding squelch sort of snapped Larry out of it. He realized he'd just been standing there like an idiot, listening to a woman die, even though he knew he was probably next. He yelled at the men to get back in the car. They had to go. But Larry didn't even finish his sentence, because the creature struck again. It shot out from behind his tree. All Larry saw was a blur of fur before it grabbed the man and hurtled into the cab of the SUV. The vehicle shook violently. As the man screamed, Larry heard the squelch of claws and flesh. He heard the wretched gurgle of lungs filling with blood. But this time, he wasn't going to wait around for death. Larry wasn't really a runner. Remember, he was a desk guy, so all this exercise was getting to him. His chest was wheezing. His legs felt like lead. His arms were getting stiff from lactic acid. He felt delirious. And what was worse, he didn't know where he was going, which was really bad, because the monster lived here. This thing had a home field advantage, while Larry was running blind. He staggered through the trees, weaving between trunks and stumbling over roots and rocks. Then he saw it, the blur at the corner of his eye. But each time he looked at it directly, it would disappear. He guessed he didn't need to see it. He knew what it was. It was the elusive, bloodthirsty thing that had killed the loggers and the littering couple. Now, it was finally coming for Larry. He let out a ragged sob and pumped his arms, trying like hell to run faster, even though he understood there was no point. He could feel the creature getting closer, dashing between trees, using them for cover, until it slid behind the one beside him. He could hear its low, heavy breath. Larry closed his eyes and screamed. He felt the tip of a claw graze his cheek and knew the creature was upon him. Larry took one last leap forward and felt the air change. He staggered forward a few more steps before opening his eyes. He was in a massive clearing, a huge circle in the forest removed neatly like a cookie cutter. The sun shone down brightly for the first time, now unobstructed by the woods that normally covered this swath of land. This clearing was made by Larry's logging company, he realized. They'd been working in this spot. By the looks of it, they'd done a good job. Mulch and mud covered the scene, some rocks here and there, but no trees. They were all back at the logging site, cut and stacked into neat piles, ready to be sold and shipped. Larry looked back at the tree line just in time to see a furry hand disappear behind a trunk. Larry puzzled over that for a second. It didn't seem like the creature was following him, or at least not right away. It seemed to need the trees, or things to hide behind. Larry sort of snorted out a laugh. He could actually relate to that. He liked hiding too, in his office, behind his desk. That's what they both were, little hide-behinds. He moved closer to the center of the clearing, further away from the woods. He took stock of what he had and what his options were. His cell still didn't have service, so it was useless. His legs were dead tired. He looked around his feet for a weapon or something. There were some shorn branches, upturned roots, an animal carcass lay a few feet away. Some squirrel that had gotten in the logger's crosshairs by the look of it made him feel a stab of guilt. He'd ordered this clearing from his cozy office in Portland. It was one thing to look at it in terms of output and productivity. It was another to see the carnage up close. And you know what? He really didn't like it. He stared at the tree line and saw some movement. A hand reached around a trunk. Then, a face joined it. The thing. The hide-behind, he decided to call it. It was only half looking at him, keeping one eye behind the tree. But the one that stared at him was soul-crushing. 'Cause it was a human eye. A wide, vulnerable green stare set in a hairy face. And damn, it didn't look vicious, or hungry, or deranged. It just looked sad. Larry didn't blame it. This forest was its home. This clearing was once full of majestic trees, and they'd been gutted. Larry had been forced to leave his safe space today. But the hide-behind, its safe space was being systematically destroyed. If Larry hadn't seen the creature's gory violence up close, he might have gone over to the thing, shook its hand, and apologized for the havoc he'd caused. As if it was reading Larry's thoughts, the hide-behind tilted his head back and let out a searing, mournful wail, the kind that makes tears spring to your eyes. It was a cry of despair, the kind you or I might make if we had to watch our own homes burn. Then the hide-behind finally stepped out from the trees. It was an incredible creature, impossibly tall and thin. It looked like a willowy humanoid bear, but it also sort of oscillated, like its bones were rubbery and malleable, able to slink from tree to tree without being seen. Larry hardly had time to admire it, because as soon as it stepped into the clearing, it broke into a run. Racing towards Larry, claws outstretched, fur blowing behind it like dark, russet streamers. Larry should have run. Honestly, he tried, but by the time he turned to flee, the hide-behind was already there. It slammed into him. He felt its furry hands grab the side of his head and jerk it to the side. The life-ending crack of his neck was the last thing Larry heard. The transpo driver finished his tale and shook his head. Said he came upon that logging site soon after while making his weekly pickup. He didn't even get out of his truck, just drove back around and went to get some help. He heard a rumor that Larry was the last body they found, ravaged and stuffed with sticks in the middle of that clearing. There had been no sign of the hide-behind since, but something told him it was around, keeping an eye on things, hoping the protesters shut down the rest of the logging in these woods, so it didn't have to. I looked into the trees, chilled to my core. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I swore I saw something move. Too fast for me to see, though, just a blur. I considered getting in Scott's car and peeling out of there, but I understood that the hide-behind saw everything. It's a thing that waits and observes. It knows what's what, and I wanted it to understand I wasn't the enemy. So I joined those protesters. I let my voice belt out their chant. Listen, I'm aware that it shouldn't take the threat of a monster to convince someone to do the right thing. It shouldn't. But sometimes, it does. And as long as the right thing gets done, well, that should be what matters. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Kate Murdoch and produced by Abakar Adan, editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. Coordinating producer is Avery Siegel. Artwork by Jessica Clarkston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levin. Executive producer at Will Media is Will Malnati. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.